In the long history of Europe's frontier with the Islamic world, few cities have carried the symbolic weight of Vienna. Situated on the Danube, guarding the routes between Central Europe and the Balkans, the city stood not merely as a settlement of stone and timber, but as a hinge between worlds. To the east lay the Ottoman Empire, confident, expansive, and in the 16th century, seemingly unstoppable. To the west lay the fractured realms of Christendom, divided by faith, dynasty, and ambition. Twice, in the space of a century and a half, Vienna would become the focal point of this collision. Twice, Ottoman armies would lay siege to its walls, and twice they would fail. Yet these failures were neither inevitable nor insignificant. They marked turning points, moments when imperial momentum slowed, when confidence faltered, and when the limits of Ottoman expansion were exposed. To understand the sieges of Vienna is not merely to recount two military campaigns, but to examine how empires test themselves against geography, logistics, and time itself. Welcome to History Unpacked. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. We post every week, and we welcome any feedback. By the early 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached the height of its power. Constantinople had fallen in 1453. The Balkans were firmly under Ottoman control. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and much of Hungary had been absorbed into the imperial system. The Ottomans were no longer a rising power, they were the dominant force of southeastern Europe. At the center of this expansion stood Suleiman I, known in Europe as the Magnificent and in the Ottoman world as the Lawgiver. His reign represented a rare convergence of military success, administrative reform, and cultural flourishing. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire was disciplined, professional, and battle-hardened. Its elite janissaries were amongst the most formidable infantry in the world, supported by artillery that had already shattered medieval fortifications elsewhere. The immediate prelude to Vienna lay in Hungary. In 1526, at the Battle of Mohacs, the Hungarian army was annihilated. King Louis II died fleeing the battlefield, leaving the kingdom leaderless and vulnerable. Hungary fractured, one faction supporting the Habsburgs, another aligning with the Ottomans. This instability offered Suleiman both a justification and an opportunity. Vienna, capital of the Habsburg lands, now stood exposed. It was not the ultimate objective of Ottoman strategy. Constantinople remained the imperial center, but it was a logical extension of influence. If Vienna fell, the Danube would open deep into the heart of Europe. In the spring of 1529, Suleiman set out from Constantinople at the head of a vast army. Contemporaries estimates vary wildly, but modern historians suggest a force of perhaps 120,000 men, accompanied by heavy artillery, engineers, and an immense logistical train. It was one of the largest armies ever assembled by the Ottomans. Yet from the beginning, the campaign was troubled. Unseasonable rains turned Balkan roads into mud. Supply wagons sank or broke. Heavy siege guns, so crucial to Ottoman success, had to be abandoned along the way. Disease spread through the camp. By the time the army reached Vienna in late September, it was already weakened by exhaustion and delay. Vienna itself was ill-prepared for such an assault. Its medieval walls were outdated, its garrison small, perhaps 16,000 defenders, including mercenaries, local militia, and Spanish infantry sent by the Habsburgs. Command fell to Nicholas, Count Salm, an experienced soldier well into his 70s. What Vienna lacked in numbers, however, it made up for in urgency. The defenders worked feverishly to reinforce the walls with earthworks, to block gates, and to prepare for assault. They understood that relief was unlikely. If Vienna fell, there would be no second line. The Ottoman Empire encircled the city and began bombardment. Lacking their heaviest cannons, Ottoman engineers turned to mining, digging tunnels beneath the walls, packing them with explosives, and collapsing sections in controlled blasts. Several breaches were opened. Repeated assaults followed. Each time they were repelled. The fighting was brutal and intimate. Janissaries surged through smoke and rubble, only to be met by pikes, swords, and gunfire at close range. The defenders fought not for territory, but for survival. Every breach was contested, every yard of ground reclaimed. As October wore on, conditions worsened. Cold rain turned to snow, supplies ran low, morale faltered. On the 14th of October, 1529, Suleiman ordered a final assault. It failed. Days later, the Ottoman army began its retreat. The first siege of Vienna had lasted less than a month. Militarily, it was inconclusive. Politically, however, it was decisive. For the first time, the Ottomans had been stopped at the gates of Central Europe. The failure of 1529 did not end Ottoman influence in the region. Hungary remained contested. Border warfare continued. Suleiman himself would campaign again in Central Europe, though never once more against Vienna directly. Yet something had changed. The siege revealed that distance and logistics, not enemy armies alone, could blunt Ottoman power. The empire excelled in campaigns across the eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans, but Vienna lay at the extreme edge of what could be sustained from Constantinople. Each mile stretched supply lines thinner. Each delay multiplied risk. Vienna, battered but intact, became a symbol, proof that the Ottoman advance was not inexorable. Still, the story was not finished. By the late 17th century, the world had shifted. The Ottoman Empire remained vast, but its internal cohesion had weakened. Court politics had grown more unstable. Military innovation had slowed. European states, by contrast, had professionalized their armies, refined their artillery, and developed complex systems of alliance. Vienna, meanwhile, had transformed itself into a modern fortress. Italian-style bastions replaced medieval walls. The city had learned from 1529 and prepared accordingly. Yet, in 1683, the Ottomans returned. The initiative came not from the Sultan alone, but from the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, an ambitious and confident figure who believed the time was ripe to strike again at Vienna. The Habsburgs were distracted by wars elsewhere. Europe once more appeared divided. The campaign was framed as a decisive blow, a final assertion of Ottoman dominance in Central Europe. In July 1683, an Ottoman army, perhaps 150,000 strong, though again numbers are debated, arrived before Vienna. This time there was no pretense of limited objectives. Mustafa intended not merely to threaten the city, but to take it intact, as a jewel of conquest. The defenders numbered around 15,000, under the command of Ernst Rudiger von Stauffenberg. Civilians were evacuated where possible, churches became storehouses, streets were barricaded, the city prepared for another test of endurance. Once again, Ottoman engineers turned to mining. Trenches crept closer, bombardment intensified. Sections of the walls collapsed, foods grew scarce, disease spread among the defenders. By early September, Vienna stood on the brink of collapse. Yet, beyond the hills to the west, relief was coming. A coalition had formed, an alliance of the Habsburgs, German princes, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. At its head rode King Jan III Sobieski of Poland, a seasoned commander and a charismatic leader. On the 12th of September 1683, the Allied army launched its attack from the Kahlenberg Heights, overlooking Vienna. What followed was one of the largest cavalry charges in European history. Polish winged hussars, armored, mounted, and terrifying in appearance, swept down upon the Ottoman lines. Caught between the city's defenders and the relieving army, Ottoman cohesion broke. Kara Mustafa, who had delayed a full assault in hopes of claiming Vienna undamaged, found himself outmaneuvered. By evening, the Ottoman army was in retreat. Vienna was saved. The Second Siege of Vienna marked more than a military defeat, it signaled a turning point. In the years that followed, the Ottomans would lose Hungary, Transylvania, and much of their European territory. The Great Turkish War shifted the balance decisively in favor of the Habsburgs. The empire that had once threatened Vienna now struggled to defend its own borders. Kara Mustafa Pasha paid with his life. Executed on the Sultan's orders, He became a symbol of overreach, of ambition untempered by caution. Vienna, by contrast, emerged not merely intact but triumphant. It became the eastern bulwark of Habsburg power, a city defined by survival as much as culture. The two sieges of Vienna, separated by 154 years, reveal a deeper truth about empire. In 1529, the Ottomans were at their zenith, yet undone by weather, distance, and time. In 1683, they returned with confidence, only to be defeated by alliance, coordination, and restraint turned into excess. Vienna did not triumph through strength alone. It survived because it adapted, because it learned, fortified, and endured long enough for circumstances to change. Twice besieged, twice spared, and in those narrow escapes, the map of Europe was redrawn.